Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly chat about local history. Thanks for joining me. As always, I'm Robert Lowell Goller. This week's topic comes from my most recent monthly newspaper column. As many of you know, I get a lot of great feedback about the column, and I appreciate the Easter Advertiser giving me the opportunity to share local history on its pages. But there's been a lot of presidential history given the fact that we're having an inauguration coming up, and so I've been researching a lot of presidential history, some things that have been on the back burner. There's no better time than now to talk about it, given we've had a presidential election and the presidential inauguration coming up. So, one of the things that sort of came together in a weird way is an exhibit that we have as part of my job as town historian. An exhibit we have of the Globe Hotel registers, the guest registers. There are five bound books that have been donated to the town historian's office, over the years by a variety of several of the owners of the Globe Hotel, which has been closed for the past 2 years. But to preserve them and not have them in that building, they donated them, and we're in the process of trying to get them scanned and transcribed and go through all the pages. And it's fascinating to see all the different people who came and visited from where they were from, and a couple like circuses would come to town, and traveling entertainers would come, and they would be signed into the Globe Hotel register. So we're trying to go through them all. But if you want to see them in person, they're on exhibit at least through the end of the month. We might extend it, but at least through the end of January. Pop into the Municipal Center on Oakwood Avenue to see the actual books and the signatures. It's quite fascinating how they would sign in each guest to the Globe Hotel, just like any hotel. But one of the entries, and it was actually marked. Someone had put a bookmark in it, and I don't know who did years ago. Put a bookmark that said Grover Cleveland, and there are a couple bookmarks actually in there of people who visited the Globe Hotel. And some of them, like the circus I mentioned, there was actually a circus that had a like leaflet with all the names of the people who were performers in the circus, and instead of hand signing in each of the hotels they stayed at, they just gave the leaflet to the hotel clerk, and they pasted it into the guest register, which is kind of interesting. And we'll feature that in a couple days or weeks. I'll post that on social media. It's kind of a neat part of those hotel registers. But one said Grover Cleveland, and it had a bookmark on it, one of the bookmarks. And so I opened it up. November 2nd of 1890, there is a name, a couple names, and one of them says Grover Cleveland, comma, New York. And for a while, we just assumed, oh, it was Grover Cleveland visit East Aurora. And this wouldn't be unusual because Grover Cleveland was, of course, before he became president, he was Erie County Sheriff. He was Buffalo Mayor. He became New York Governor, and then he became President of the United States. And to see his name in East Aurora, in Buffalo, is not unusual. He would have signed in places, so it wasn't really unusual. But I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I was a couple years ago going to feature it and feature his name, his entry in an exhibit that I was doing. And I thought, I just want to be sure that this was the actual Grover Cleveland. So I, at the time, did a little research, and it was inconclusive. And then finally, with the exhibit that we did at the town hall, and with the presidential election happening, I'm like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So November 2nd of 1890 would have been an extremely interesting time. And I'm going to put a link to the article in the Easter Advertiser I did a couple days ago, but I'll put another link in the comments here if you want to read the whole thing for all the details. And of course, I'm working on some book projects, so of course, lots of this presidential history stuff will be included in some upcoming books that I'm going to publish. But November 2nd, 1890, Grover Cleveland's name appears in the Globe Register. And if in context, that would have been an extremely interesting time for him to visit East Aurora, because just 2 days later was the midterm elections. And Grover Cleveland, from a context of modern, to have a modern context, even though they don't have the same ideas on things, but it would have been like Donald Trump visiting in between his two terms. Grover Cleveland was, of course, the only president before Donald Trump to serve two non-consecutive terms. And November 2nd of 1890 was smack dab in the middle of those two presidential terms. So if he had visited East Aurora in 1890, Grover Cleveland would have been a former president and a future president at the same time. So like Donald Trump was for the past 4 years. But what made it really intriguing was that November 2nd was 2 days before the election, that was a midterm election that swept McKinley's party back into power in Washington and gave him a boost for his quest to become president again. And a lot of people had kept his name in the hopper. He had lost the electoral college, but had 2 years earlier, but had won the popular vote. So he felt like he could come back, and there were a lot of people supporting him. So it would have been similar to Donald Trump the past 4 years, where his name is still mentioned. Not all the legal troubles that Donald Trump's had over the past 4 years, but from a political standpoint, where his name was still in the news, his every move was being followed, and this would have been 2 days before that midterm election. So I thought, well, that doesn't. Why would he be in East Aurora at that moment? So two things that leave me to believe. There are lots of things, but two or three things that lead me to believe that Grover Cleveland did not visit the Globe Hotel on November 2nd, 1890. He most likely visited it before he was president as Erie County Sheriff. Now he owned land before he left the area, before he became governor. He owned land at the corner of Davis Road and Route 20A, actually the southwestern corner, and that's documented through property records. He owned land in the town of Aurora. So he would have visited, he would have come down by train, even if he lived in Buffalo. He would have come down here to be a landlord, and as sheriff, he would have come down here. So we know he came to East Aurora, most likely stopped at the Globe Hotel. But did he sign in? Did he stay on November 2nd of 1890? Well, first thing is the signature that is in the book is doesn't even come close to his confirmed signature. It bears absolutely no resemblance. So if Grover Cleveland did in fact sign in to the Globe Hotel, he did not write it himself. But a clerk could have, or someone from his entourage could have, but they would have also signed in if they were staying at the Globe. So it's not his signature, and that happened sometimes, but not always. So if you are looking through old hotel registers, they're actually quite a neat thing in small communities like East Aurora. There were hotels all over the place that kept guest registers. Um, don't always think that what you're seeing is the signature of the guest. It might have been someone else signing in. So even if Grover Cleveland showed up and the clerk signed his name, there are other reasons to believe that why he wasn't visiting East Aurora. Um, a second thing is a book that I highly recommend if you're into presidential history, especially in Buffalo. Martin S. Nowak wrote a book, Buffalo and the Presidents, and it is a very detailed account of all the presidential visits. Presidents, former presidents, future presidents who've come to Buffalo and the Buffalo area, and so I hadn't had this book before writing this article, and I'm kind of ashamed to say so. It's published a couple of years ago. Fascinating book. I've already read it. But there's no mention in here of Grover Cleveland's visit in 1890 to the Buffalo area through his extensive research. So that's another reason, trusting the research here. Um, and then I dug back into contemporary sources back then of November of 1890, late October, early November of 1890. And of course, now with the internet and digital newspapers, it's fairly much easier to do today than it would have been 10, 20 years ago. Grover Cleveland was not in East Aurora. Actually, there is no accounting of Grover Cleveland in East Aurora in Buffalo newspapers or in the East Aurora Advertiser. A newspaper publisher, Charles Hamilton, was here. Famous. He had started the Aurora Standard here in East Aurora and actually moved to Washington, D.C., became a pretty prominent Washington correspondent. He was visiting East Aurora. The Advertiser documented him staying at the Globe Hotel. His signature actually appears a few lines down from Grover Cleveland's. Um, they said he was here to vote. He had maintained his legal address here in East Aurora, so he came back from Washington to vote. But there was no mention of Grover Cleveland. And one would think that even if Grover Cleveland was being just like maybe Donald Trump during this period in between his presidencies, and as a potential, a pretty favored candidate for reelection, the media was keeping track of him. Actually, where Grover Cleveland ate, what he ate, all his visitors, where any city he went to. He actually, someone said that he had dropped dead in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks earlier. They all had that in the newspaper. So the fact that he would have come to East Aurora secretly and nobody would have reported on it is very hard to believe. So, so the media had nothing, no reports of him visiting the Buffalo area in November of 1890, both in East Aurora and Buffalo. However, the media in New York City had him there. He was writing letters both in the days before and after his supposed visit to East Aurora. And one of the more interesting accounts that I found was 2 days later, he voted near his home. And there's a great account in one of the newspapers about him showing up, standing in line. It was too cold. He saw that the line was too long, and so he went back home. Um, and so the railroad, I did a little research into, could Grover Cleveland have potentially gotten to East Aurora and gotten back to New York City in that, 2 day period in between the news reports having him in New York City? And he just couldn't have. The trains weren't fast enough. They actually didn't. The express trains hadn't been put into service yet from New York City to Buffalo. So he would have gotten from New York to Buffalo, but then he would have had to come down on a different train to East Aurora, then back up to Buffalo and back to New York City. He just physically could not have done it. So, um, one, there's no, his signature doesn't match, and two, he physically could not have been here, um, gotten here to East Aurora on November 2nd of 1890. So, why does his name then appear in the Globe Hotel Register? Well, I have a theory. I think, and I didn't include this in the article because it's really just my theory, and I don't have any uh, true basis in documentation, but just all the evidence seems to point, and my gut's telling me that somebody really liked Grover Cleveland and wanted him to win re-election. There was actually a movement at the time to get him to consider running. He still led a movement. His party still supported him. Again, the popular vote, he had won 2 years earlier. And I think someone, just as perhaps as a joke or a way to support his candidacy, put Grover Cleveland in the hotel register. Maybe as a joke, but maybe more so as a way to show support for Grover Cleveland and his movement, similar to what we saw with presidential candidates the last 4 years. Um, President Trump being a good example, where people still supported him and showed their support, signs on their lawns, things like that. Um, uh, Politics aside and his views aside, whatever way you are on the political spectrum, it's a similar feeling, I think, among people who support a political candidate. And I think Grover Cleveland was still, people were kind of upset that he lost the presidency, even though he won the popular vote in 1888. And so I think people were showing signs of support for him. And one of the ways might have been writing his name as a joke in the hotel register. Regardless, if it was a joke, the joke's still on us. 135 years later, because we're still talking about this signature that's in the Globe Hotel Register. So that's my theory: is that someone else wrote it in as a joke and to maybe get people talking about Grover Cleveland, and it worked because we're still talking about him 130 or so years later, 135 years later. Um, this isn't the only time. By the way, if you want to see we actually have the book open in the exhibit at the Municipal Center to the page where Grover Cleveland's name appears with a little more explanation. So if you want to come in and see it in person, please do. Again, it'll be on view till the end of the month. This isn't the only time that a hotel register has spurred some controversy and mystery. I'm working actually on an article now about there was a little hotel in East Aurora that claimed that Adolf Hitler visited East Aurora because there was a name Hitler in the hotel register. Not to give away the ending, but Adolf Hitler did not visit East Aurora. But there's a reason why this spurred some excitement and discussion, and I go into that so keep your eyes open for that that mystery at the hotel, another hotel in East Aurora about whether or not Adolf Hitler visited East Aurora. So again, don't always believe what you see. Hotel registers are fun. They're great sorts of history, but there's a lot of mystery with that history because sometimes names appear that may not have been there. There was one great instance too, being careful about who visited a community. Susan B. Anthony for a long time has been was said to have visited East Aurora, and she did. She visited in 1901. I was able to figure that out, but there was a previous date, 1888, I think, um, and that was listed as a visit by Susan B. Anthony for several years. It was in there, but what I found out as I went back into the newspaper articles, for several weeks they were advertising a visit by Susan B. Anthony, and unfortunately the day she was supposed to arrive, she was in Chicago, I think, and she got sick and couldn't come. And so ultimately, she didn't visit East Aurora, but she got recorded as visiting East Aurora because she was scheduled to visit. So you have to always follow up. And so that sometimes happens too. Did someone actually visit, or is it just see how it's documented? It could be all the hype beforehand, and then they never showed up, and so that visit never actually happened. I'm also working on some research about continuing the presidential theme, and it'll be coming soon, is whether or not a sitting U.S. president has ever visited East Aurora. Someone had asked me that one, asked me one time, and I've done a lot of research because I'm intrigued by that. So stay tuned because upcoming will be a monthly column, and of course I'll include it in a book about whether or not a sitting president. Of course, we've had Cleveland and Fillmore. Millard Fillmore certainly visited the Globe Hotel because he lived here, he worked here, he worked on the same block as the Globe. Um, so we know that Grover Cleveland and Millard Fillmore were here as future and probably former presidents, but has a sitting U.S. president visited East Aurora. So stay tuned for my research on that. And I'm not going to give away the ending on that one. You'll have to wait. So thanks again for these great ideas. If you have a great idea, good idea for a topic for our weekly discussion, please feel free to throw it my way. Some people send me emails. It's great. Even it's funny how the simplest of questions can turn into a very complicated sometimes answer, and I love that. I love to research and find out the answer. So send the questions my way. Again, I'm Robert Lowell Goller. I am the Town and Village Historian, but these videos and a lot of my research are separate from my official duties as Town and Village Historian. Thanks so much for supporting this project. Viewership keeps going up. If you like what you hear, feel free to share the videos on Facebook. They're also on YouTube. Feel free to share them. If you're not liking the page or following the page, just click that follow button and then you'll get all the videos as they happen. You won't come across them by accident. And I try to do this each Tuesday afternoon just to keep me on schedule, but you can watch the videos at any time, and I appreciate that. Again, send ideas my way, and until next time, thank you so much for keeping history alive. Take care.